Hey, good morning. It's Jim Dodson, the Florida Bike Guy. Was sitting here looking for Katie to give me the signal there. So welcome to our live stream. If you are new to the program, we're interviewing interesting people in the cycling world. Today I have a wonderful guest on, Sara Dykman. I think say hello, Sarah's coming to us from Kansas somewhere. Is that right?
Yep.
Sitting outside on a warm day in Kansas. Sarah's got a fascinating story. I think I read about your story originally in Bicycling Magazine. Had a nice big article about you. So the introduction is
probably
go ahead.
I was just gonna say it was probably in the Adventure Cycling magazine, which
Maybe it was
everyone
Adventure
should check out.
Cycling, correct? Yeah. All right. So would you ride your bike 10,000 miles to follow the monarch migration pattern? So Sara is someone who actually did that. Sara, tell us a little bit about your passion for butterflies and wildlife. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I love bikes and I love animals. I love exploring, and the bike is just the perfect way. You're going slow enough that you see so many things that a car or an airplane would miss. And you get to kind of connect the dots between the most touristy places and really just like get to know an area. And so I've been biking since I was little, and I've always loved pushing myself. And I got the idea to follow the monarchs as a bit of a publicity stunt. So I made plans to follow their entire migration, and I didn't know a lot about the monarch. I knew enough to start making a plan, and I contacted scientists and read a lot of books and articles and went to Mexico, and where they overwinter in the overwintering colonies in about the center of Mexico in the state of Michoacan. And it was phenomenal. And when the monarchs left in the spring in March, I followed them as best I could all the way to Canada. And I was observing them and meeting people and learning a lot. And then once I was in Canada, I aimed my bike south and went back. And I wasn't following the exact same monarchs because they're multi-generational, but I was following their migration path. And I made it back to Mexico where they overwinter, that same forest, about 10,000 miles later.
And you did all this alone, is that right?
Well, the joke is that I did it with millions of monarchs, but I was the only person biking, or butter biking.
Right.
I call my trip butter bike because I can't fly like a butterfly, but I can bike like a butter biker.
Awesome. That's very fascinating. So this trip that you took was in what year?
I started March and finished in November of 2017.
Okay. And how many miles did you ride?
Oops, sorry. I biked about, my total was 10,200 miles, I think 201. And I usually would try and go about 50 miles a day.
All right.
I was stopping a lot along the way to give presentations, mostly to school kids. And so that would kind of force me to bike longer days, 60 or 70 miles, and then have rest days to do presentations.
And this total trip took you 9.5 months. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Just like the monarchs.
So we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about the monarchs and the whole migration pattern. Let's back up a little bit about Sara. You actually have a degree in wildlife biology. Is that correct?
Yep. And, from a school in California called Humboldt.
I think everybody knows where Humboldt College is. Even I know about it.
It's a great school.
And you had a particular interest in frogs and butterflies, from what you and I have discussed.
Yeah, I always have loved frogs. I think they're these amazing transformational creatures that go from land or from water to land, from vegetarian to carnivore, from gills to lungs. And they're sort of, people forget to look at them. They forget to see them. And they just see like some slimy, gross creature. But I get paid to study them, and I get paid to go out and find them and catch their tadpoles. And so when you're looking at them and really giving them time, you just see how incredibly beautiful and diverse and interesting they are. So I've always loved frogs. And insects also, I think, are kind of underappreciated. And so it was an easy transition from from frogs to insects and butterflies.
So, but these species, particularly frogs and butterflies, are what you have called, I think in our conversation, a sentinel species. Is that correct? A
Or
species that, go ahead.
maybe indicator species is what I said.
Well, it's a species that tells us the health of the diversity of our environment. Is that correct? What's the
Yeah,
word?
and I call that indicator species, but I'm sure there's other names for it too.
Okay. All right.
And I like to think that they indicate the health of the planet. So if frogs worldwide are declining, and that's in large part due to climate change, habitat loss, and pollution.
Right.
And frogs breathe through their skin. So if there's any problems at all in the environment, the frogs are the first to go. And worldwide, we're seeing frog declines, and we can learn from what they're saying, not with words, but with their population, how the planet's doing. And it's not good. And monarchs are really similar. Over the last 20 years, scientists have found really dramatic declines in their population, and that tells us something is wrong. And that means something is wrong in our own backyards in North America.
Right. Yeah, we talked before our program about, as you were making this migratory ride, how upsetting it was to you to see the sterile environments we're creating along our roadsides and in our yards. Talk to me a minute about that.
Yeah, biking puts you up close and personal with the world. And so you get to see the beautiful parts, and you get to see the ugly parts too, or the parts that you wish that you could change. So I spent hours and hours and hours biking along roadsides that either had been mowed or sprayed, and all that potential was just erased, mostly in a lot of cases because we think green grass looks more beautiful than a wild prairie. And I've trained my eyes to see when I see a wild lawn, or when I see a lot that isn't mowed, I see the potential, and I see all the creatures. Even when I can't see them from far away, I see all those creatures that are living and thriving, and all the birds and reptiles and mammals that that space attracts and gives space to live. So I saw the beautiful potential, and then I would see a mower come by and just cut it down, and you feel pretty powerless at that point. I don't own any land. So you just think, man, if only that person knew what they were cutting down, and if only they thought, this land is not just mine. Like, I need to remember to share it with other creatures. So it could get really, really frustrating.
And I think we were talking about the fact that here in Florida, everybody plants these St. Augustine grass, and we have mowed grasses, and you pay lawn services to come in and spray, and anything that moves really gets sprayed out of existence. And it's quite an unnatural environment, really, from the diversity of animals and insects and reptiles and rodents and all that. We think it's good for us, but it's really not good for the environment. It's really not good for the environment in which we live.
Right. I mean, everything you spray ends up in your water. And so you're drinking that stuff that can kill a monarch caterpillar. So why do we think it won't hurt us as well?
Right.
Not to mention all the resources that go into those chemicals and into that water and into mowing. It's pretty silly. And we were taught that. We were trained to think that that's beautiful, and we can change, and we can start to plant gardens and put up little signs and talk to our neighbors. One of the greatest things I saw on my trip was I visited a woman in Missouri who had this amazing garden. Her whole front yard was native plants. And you could see right where her property line was because her neighbors had perfectly manicured grass, except for there was this little pocket of milkweed. And there's different species of milkweed, and one called common milkweed, which is my favorite. It spreads by rhizomes. So the same plant will spread underground and then pop up. And some people are scared of this. But one of my friend's plants had spread to her neighbors. And because my friend had been speaking with her neighbor, the neighbor didn't mow that milkweed down, and she'd left it. And so I literally could see the spread of ideas and of habitat. And that's how it happens. I tell folks, I can't talk to every single person in North America, but if I talk to a handful and they talk to a handful, like, this idea can spread, and we can literally spread milkweed. as well as the
Well,
idea.
and you're talking about milkweed for what reason?
Well, milkweed is the only plant that the monarch caterpillars eat, and it's a really special plant. It's called milkweed because if you tear a little leaf, this milky latex comes out, and that's a glue, and it's a sticky glue that actually will kill or glue shut the mouths of small herbivores. But it also is a poison or toxin that stops the heart. And so if I was to eat it, I would likely, I would spit it out because it's really bitter tasting and gross. But a caterpillar can actually eat that milkweed and then hold those toxins in its body, and thus it becomes toxic as it eats more and more milkweed. So the reason a monarch adult butterfly is orange is because it's warning predators that it's now poisonous, because when it was a caterpillar, it ate milkweed.
Oh, wow.
And the milkweed is the only plant that the caterpillars can eat, the monarch caterpillars. Each butterfly has a host plant or a few host plants. And so the milkweed is in decline. It used to cover most of North America, especially the prairie. It was all over the prairies of North America, and farms came in, herbicides came in, pesticides came in, and all those things took away the habitat. So every year there's less milkweed, and if there's less milkweed, there's less monarchs.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things you and I have talked about is that as cyclists, we have a unique opportunity. People riding by in their cars at 65 or 70 miles an hour rarely take note of the things that we have an opportunity to observe, particularly when we get away from our towns and cities into the countryside and see the biodiverse fields and the farms and the magnificent beauty that lurks there, particularly right beneath the surface of the plant. And what all that we can be doing to encourage that and discourage its destruction, really.
What can we be doing? Yeah. And I think it's amazing because in a car, if you see something interesting, you just can't stop. Inertia is not your friend in a car. But on a bike, well, one, you're tired, and any excuse to stop I like. So I'll see something in the corner of my eye and I'll slam on my brakes and I'll be in the ditch looking, and it actually caused twice the cops to show up because people called 911 thinking that I had crashed. I'm like, no, I'm just looking for butterflies. And they're like, what? But yeah, so when we have those moments where we get to really interact with the world that we live in, that makes us want to do something about it. It's harder to ignore. And so was your question, how can we help? Or were you just making
I think it's an encouragement for us that we can take it upon ourselves to be better informed, not
right.
To be more than just passers-by in the environment, to understand it and do what we can do to enhance it.
Yeah. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes, and the more you keep realizing, oh yeah, there's more and more and more to see. So it's it feeds itself.
So let's talk a minute about your background. I know you told us you went to college. Where were you born and raised, and where did you spend your youth?
I grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City and didn't really have any access to nature, but I liked to ride my bike. I thought it was super far away, but it was like 3 or 4 miles, these massive adventures. And then I went to college and I got exposed to a lot of people that did more outdoor things. And yeah, I loved it from the start. So keep pushing myself, and my friends push me.
I know you had an adventure when you were in college too. You bought your first real bike. You bought a Cannondale.
Right. That was actually in high school. Yeah. I saved up my money.
That's right.
And did a trip through an organization called the Student Hostling Program, which is out of the East Coast. And they run trips. And I chose the 1,000-mile trip because I thought it sounded amazing. And it was. It was a month long. I think we were all 14 or 15 or 16, except for the leader. The leaders were 21 and 24. So we were just a bunch of kids and just proving to ourselves that we could use our own bodies to get far and have an adventure. So it was really remarkable.
And that trip was 1,000 miles over 30 days. Is that right?
Yep.
Massachusetts
something like
to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then you went to college, you got involved in advocating for non-motorized transportation, and you got involved in another tour. Tell us about that one.
After college, my friends and I were all really linked by the bicycle. You know, like you said, we did all that advocacy work, and we were just really passionate about pushing ourselves and pushing our communities. And we decided, let's go on a bike tour. And my friend got the idea to bike to, he was thinking either 48 or 49 states, and we decided 49 sounded better. So we spent about a year making a plan, including a route to bike to 49 states. And literally just planning the route was pretty difficult because of winter. And our mantra was, it's going to be cold somewhere. And it was. Right. But during that time, we decided also that we wanted to share our trip and share what we were learning with people. So we started doing presentations to schools, and we were not educators. We had no experience with any of that, but we learned as we went, and we ended up presenting to about 100 schools.
Wow.
And we got a lot better, a lot better. And it was really amazing.
So how far was that trip? 49 states?
It was 15,000 miles and took 13 months.
Wow. And you basically told me you were living essentially on $5 a day. Is that right?
That's something goal? Like that. I can't remember. It was mostly either we cooked, and that didn't cost much money. We never paid for camping. We call it guerrilla camping, but stealth camping, as people call it too. And then people got word of our trip, and they wanted to help us. And so they'd invite us in and give us a place to stay, a shower, laundry, a meal. And that really carried us pretty far.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So then after that, you ended up taking another trip throughout from Bolivia to Texas. This is before the butterfly migration. I think this is where you got the idea originally. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. But I really wanted to go on an adventure in a foreign country, and I made contacts with someone in Bolivia, and I spent a bit of time there working with a frog that's really special called the giant frog of Lake Titicaca. You should look it up. It's very cute. And then I decided I was going to ride my bike, and I brought my bike, and luckily I had a friend that wanted to do it with me. So she and I biked. Our goal was to get to the United States, and we made it to San Antonio, Texas, and we was like, that's enough. But I really, really loved, especially Bolivia, Peru, and Mexico. They were my favorites.
I was just saying, when we had this little glitch there for the last 30 or 40 seconds, what a reminder Sarah's life is in her work. For me, for all of us, I think, to be more aware of the amazing diversity around us, and to be mindful of what we can do to enhance it, and really take steps not to make it worse. I think one of the things that we were talking about, Sarah, at the time, is you were talking about the trip from Bolivia to Texas. And I think during that trip, you got the idea of tracking the monarchs.
Right.
So tell me how that came into effect. Tell me a little bit about the monarch and why that butterfly is so attracted to you. What's so unique about them? I think we've all heard something about the migration, but I doubt any of us know that much about it.
Yeah, so the monarch is a really special insect. It's a special creature that kind of all of North America gets to take some what's the word I'm looking for? They get, I don't know. I'll come back to that idea.
It's a particularly beautiful species to me. It's so, because I know when you see one, well, we have a domestic population here in Florida. They're not all migratory. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Some of yours are resident. They used to be more migratory, but as climate change has changed, it's a better spot for them to spend the winter.
Right.
But the biggest population of monarchs lives in Mexico from basically November to March during the winter, and they live at about 10,000 feet above sea level. And it's the perfect temperature. It's basically not too hot and it's not too cold, and it allows them to survive. And in March, they start to get more active. And
Katie, let me just interrupt you. Katie just put up an image. I'm not sure if you saw it, which was a tree. And what you saw in that tree, it looks like heavy bark, is really millions of monarch butterflies clinging to the bark of that tree. Is that correct?
Yep, and those are called OML fir trees. And the trees are really important because the branches act like a roof and an umbrella to keep them at that perfect temperature so that they can survive. If it was a little warmer, they would be more active. And when animals are active, they burn more calories. And so they would use up all their fat reserves.
Oh, okay.
So they're not eating. It's kind of like hibernation, but not quite. And they're living there in those mountains. And they're basically just waiting for spring. And
So
when
this
spring,
is one particular location in central Mexico.
yep,
And
yep,
it's always the same location. It's got the perfect microclimate for this species to survive over the winter.
right. And there's a few colonies, they're called, which is a big cluster that take up several trees, but they're in a very, very small area because there's only that one tiny spot. It's way up in the mountains where the temperature is perfect.
Wow. And how do they measure the health of the monarch population?
So scientists in the winter will basically measure how many trees are covered or how much acreage is covered in monarchs. It would be impossible to count each branch and each butterfly on the branch. So they basically think how much space are they taking up? And if they're taking up more space, there's more monarchs. And if less space, there's less. And they started doing this about 20 years ago. And they actually measure in hectares. And I looked it up because I wasn't sure, but 1 hectare is about 2.5 acres.
Right.
And an acre is about a football field. So they're at the highest recorded since they started doing this technique was about 18 hectares of
Wow.
land. And last winter it was 2.5 hectares.
And you've told me that can vary year by year based on a number of factors, including the weather and temperature and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, all healthy populations in the wild fluctuate year to year. You know, there'll be a drought, there'll be lots of whatever they need to eat. So that's totally normal. The problem is that they're going up and down, but there's a trend down, and there's a trend towards zero, which would be extinct.
Yeah.
And the monarch is not in danger of extinction. There's monarchs distributed worldwide, but this migration, which is the only multi-generational, multinational migration, could disappear in our lifetimes. So
Wow, that's
it's a
amazing.
serious problem. And yeah.
So talk to me a minute about we're going to get to the bike in a minute, folks. That's fascinating in and of itself. But this migratory pattern of the monarchs is multi-generational. So tell us what that means.
Right. So when spring begins, the monarchs in Mexico will start flying north, and they'll breed along their route. And the females are looking for milkweed, which we talked about already, the only food source of the monarch caterpillars. And they start finding that in Texas, and they'll lay 1 egg per milkweed, so that when the egg, hatches, we have the caterpillar, which eats the milkweed. And after the females have laid their eggs and after the males have mated, they die. But the eggs that they laid, or the females laid, will undergo metamorphosis, so from egg, caterpillar, chrysalis, adult, and that will be our first generation, and they will continue going north. And they'll only live about a month, and during this month, they're breeding and laying eggs. They'll die, those eggs will continue, and it will take about 3 generations to get to Canada. And the monarchs will start sensing, or the caterpillars will start sensing the daylight, where the sun is in the sky, the temperature and the quality of the milkweed, scientists believe. And when it's time, instead of being sexually active, they will emerge from their chrysalids as non-sexually active, or they're in diapause, and they will fly all the way back to Mexico. And so these are the great-great-grandkids that have never been to Mexico, but they somehow know, they have a map in their DNA. They somehow know to fly all the way back to the exact same trees as their great-grandparents, and it's just phenomenal.
It's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
You know, I think you told me that when they go north, they're sort of meandering. When they come south, they fatten up with milkweed, or with honey, not honey, but
nectar. Yeah.
Nectar, and they make a beeline for that place they're going to, the mountain.
Right, which is like one reason it was so easy for me to follow them on a bicycle. You know, I wasn't literally following one monarch, and I wasn't following a line of them, but since they spread out and they're looking for milkweed, as long as I was in Texas in April, I was going to see a monarch, which was really
Right.
nice. And in the fall, I was catching the monarchs. But I kind of I'm slower than a monarch that's charging ahead. So I saw monarchs in the fall. Um, but yeah, they're a lot more direct.
Talk about the ride itself. I think a lot of people couldn't imagine doing it as a single woman, through this territory. I think we have the perception here, many of us, that that's not a safe place to ride, particularly by yourself, either man or woman. Talk about that a little bit and talk about your adventure.
Yeah, whenever I go on a trip and people tell me about all the bad things that could happen, I ask them, tell me a personal story. Tell me something that directly happened to you. And pretty much no one can. So we hear the bad things on the news. We don't hear the good things. And I
Right.
felt totally safe. I felt safer a lot of times in Mexico than I do on a busy road in the alleys. And it was a really amazing experience. And if when I'm in Mexico, I only hear the news of the United States, and I'll tell you what, sounds scary. And so we have to put news in context, and we have to just remember that we only are hearing the worst of the worst.
I
And
think
yeah,
one of the things you talked to me about was that drivers are expecting the unexpected in Mexico and Central and South America. In the United States, it's totally different. Explain that.
yeah, I mean, this is just like sort of a theory I've developed with no scientific backing, but in my experience has been that in the United States, people see the lines on the road and they see the speedometer or the speed limit, and that is my right. I am entitled to go that speed in this lane. It doesn't matter who is there. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Nothing matters but that I get to do that. And I don't think that's necessarily true in other countries I've been to. I've noticed that people are ready for the pothole, or they're ready for a family walking down the street, and they slow down and go around. And there's plenty of great drivers in the United States, but there's plenty of people that think that I am a hassle and I am not worth 5 seconds to slow down for, and it's pretty frustrating. And I was telling you, I think that every single person should have to spend a year riding their bike to work before they get their driver's license, so that they can remember that, like, there's a human being on that bicycle, and it's scary, and it only takes 5 seconds to slow down.
No, that's really a good point. It'll never happen, but I love the point. We can't even get an anti-texting bill up here without a big battle over it.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the bicycle you made for these trips that you're on. I'm kind of fascinated by that too.
I made a bike. I basically wanted just like a sturdy bike that would get the job done. And so I went to a bike co-op in Santa Cruz in California, and my friend and I pieced together I call it a Frankenstein bike. It's a specialized frame and just random parts, new and used, and nothing matches. And when things break, I can usually figure out some way to make it work. And my panniers in the front are Ortlieb's. They're store-bought, waterproof, normal panniers. And in the back, I use kitty litter buckets. And the whole thing kind of looks a little trashy, but that's actually kind of important to me, because as a traveler, I don't have to worry about my bike getting stolen like someone might that has a really fancy carbon fiber, all new gear.
Right.
Yeah, that was a picture of my bike, and it's kind of rusty. But it gets the job done. It's a smooth, great bike.
Hey, Katie, put it up again if you would. You can keep talking though, Sarah.
Yeah, so you can see everything just sort of bungeed on there haphazardly.
How much gear do you think you carry with you? How much weight do you have?
My butterfly trip, I carried a lot of gear. I was making educational videos. I was doing the presentations, and I was trying to maintain my blog and my website. So I had a tripod, I had a computer or a laptop. I told people I carried about 60, 70 pounds of gear. which is a lot. Like my bike was really heavy and I went really slow.
Yeah, I can imagine. People up here get all in a lab. They're about half a pound of
Yeah.
extra weight on their bike.
Uh,
So, and did you have any incidents anything that was curious, anything unusual that you didn't expect on the road? I know you really told me you really had no negative events, right? The whole trip.
no, yeah, people were good. I've done a lot of bike touring, and I joked that I was in New York. I was on Long Island, and I heard a car coming, and it drove really close to me, and I was like, "Oh boy, here we go!" Because I have had people spray me with water and yell things and they do the thing with the exhaust. I don't know how they do that, but they do it.
Diesel truck. Diesel truck.
And yeah, and so I was like, ready for the worst. And this guy throws his arm out the window and he throws $10 at me. Like, get yourself some, I forget what he said. But I remember thinking, that's never happened before. Never had people throw money at me. But so I've had a lot of crazy things happen and people still can surprise me.
Well, Sara, I really want to encourage you. I think that you're a fascinating guest. I think the work that you're doing is fascinating. I think one of your desires is to bring attention to the issues affecting our environment and the monarchs in particular, but other species as well.
Right. Yeah, to share the planet. And the monarch is so amazing because I call the monarch democratic, because it doesn't matter if you live in New York City or a small town in Kansas, the monarch will visit you if you plant milkweed. And it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, Republican, Democrat, black, white, like the monarch will come to your town if you have milkweed. And it doesn't take a lot of space. I stayed with a family in Tulsa who just had about 10 milkweed plants in their backyard, and they had about 40 caterpillars. And even if only one of those caterpillars survives and is female, she'll lay 500 eggs. And
That's
then
amazing.
those kids, if about 5%, excuse me, about 5% of 1% of eggs become adults. So if she laid 500 eggs, that might be 5 adults. And so it grows exponentially. And so literally every yard counts. And you can plant some milkweed and some native plants that flower for the nectar in a small sunny corner of your yard. And you can start small, and every year you can add more and more and more, and mow less and less and less, and water less and less and less. And you're going to start seeing not just monarchs, but all sorts of other amazing creatures that you might not have ever thought to look at or notice. And you can start to share the planet.
I think that's a great message. I've already talked to my wife. I have a corner of our yard that I want to do that with. We talked about it actually today, that I had been talking to Sara, and we're going to get some milkweed. Of course, I'm in Southwest Florida, and milkweed is available here. Sara suggests going to a native plant store. A lot of information online. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is. You want to just make sure if you're buying starts that they haven't been sprayed with any herbicides or pesticides. So you want to try and get basically organic starts. Otherwise, the caterpillars will eat them and they'll get poisoned. And then if you're planting seeds, you want to plant in the fall. And I'm not sure about Florida as much, but most milkweed seeds need to spend the winter getting freezing and thawing. And that's kind of what spurs them to germinate in the spring. Yeah. But yeah, lots and lots of information online, and it's sort of regional, specific to each state.
So our call to action today is, at Sara's request, that we all plant milkweed. And
yep.
I will tell you, I'll send you a picture of milkweed that I get, Sara. So we have, and maybe I'll even get some butterflies on them in the spring.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Katie's running a trailer there. If you want more about Sara's mission, you can go beyondthebook.org, learn about Sara and her amazing work. I'm Jim Dodson. Of course, my occupation is a lawyer. If I can help you or someone you know who has had an incident involving a bike crash or an automobile crash or any kind of need for a personal injury lawyer, I'm always here. There's certainly never a cost to talk about a case or a concern that you have. I've got a passion for representing cyclists, but we represent other people as well. So that's it for today. I'm Jim Dodson, the Florida Bike Guy. Sara Dykman, thank you so much for joining us. Godspeed for you and your work.
Thank you, and I can't wait to see your milkweed.
Thank you very much, Sara.
All right, thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.